G'day, welcome to another episode of Door Number C. I'm your host Caleb, and today we're going to be having a little look into the world of movies from beginning to endgame. I was looking forward to Endgame. The build-up from Spider-Man Homecoming, Thor Ragnarok, Infinity War, man, I was pumped. And then I saw the movie. It's like they thought of the coolest cliffhanger in Infinity War and then had no idea where to go on from there. And they used fucking quantum to solve their problems. So, debating whether a movie is good or not can be tricky. There's tons of subjectivity when it comes to entertainment, and the crimes of objectively lazy writing devoid of any story substance or respect for the art doesn't bother some people. So, I figured I'd start by judging the measure of a film by the amount of money people spend seeing it. Endgame is the highest grossing film of all time, but when you take inflation into account, it drops to an estimated 3rd, 4th place. But calculating the revenue from films going back 80 years is not an exact science, it seems, and I've read variations on the order of films and how much they have been estimated to make. But the 10 most repeated are Gone with the Wind, Titanic, Avatar, Star Wars, Endgame, The Sound of Music, E.T., The Ten Commandments, Dr. Zhivago, and The Force Awakens. And with the 2 supplementaries, Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, and Jaws. Okay, but using highest grossing films as a rubric for quality these days comes with a different set of standards because, unlike the other top 8 films, the Avengers and the recent Star Wars movies had the internet to elevate their comparative standings. And they also had a big body of work behind them to get them over the line. So if you think about it, all 22 MCU movies were promoting Endgame. All up, there's been a $5 billion 11-year campaign for this one film. So yeah, you'd want to hope that it makes it into the top 10. The other 8 films in the list had no such advantage, and actually laid the foundation for others to build off. 82 years ago, Disney's first full-length feature, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, paved the way for Disney to become the monolith that it is today.
You think God is in control here? I am in control! I've been in control since the 50s, in case you haven't noticed!
Giant films like Ben Hur raised the bar in spectacle. Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, they got their break and they changed cinema through their style of blockbuster. Endgame showed us what the accumulated efforts of 23 movies is like. That's something, I suppose, but something I hope that we don't see for a very long time. The reasons being is that the demands on the consumer, the demands on me is too great, right? It cost me nearly $700 in cinema tickets from The Incredible Hulk to Captain Marvel, just so I could have some context when watching Endgame. Where, right, it only cost me like $20 to enjoy Avatar. See the point I'm trying to make? Every film in the top 10, bar Endgame and The Force Awakens, are standalone films. There's evidence that even with new generations of film lovers, these standalone movies are still effective films, experienced with full intended effect. But Endgame, if the next generation hasn't seen the 22 films preceding it, Endgame by itself will mean little to nothing to anyone watching the top 10. And look, it's going to be in the top 10 probably forever. So next, I'm moving away from the consumer to see how the highest grossing movies have aged in the eyes of the critic. And as my resource, I incorporated consensus data of 52 different polls with over 3,500 critics, filmmakers, and scholars. And I got the BMI's top 25 list with the selection created by 846 critics, programmers, academics, and distributors. And what I discovered is that out of the 25 highest grossing films of all time, none of them appear in the top 50 best films of all time. It's only until we look at polls like IMDb, Empire, and the AFI do we start to see some crossovers. Star Wars: A New Hope, Jaws, E.T., and Gone with the Wind all make an appearance. And in the best of list, the only highest grossing film to make it into the top 100 is Jaws, coming in at 91. The films that most people agree on are The Godfather, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Citizen Kane, Vertigo, Singing in the Rain, Apocalypse Now, Seven Samurai, and Psycho. So while I guess it would be nice to have your movie on the highest grossing consumer list for decades and decades, it doesn't mean that your work is going to be on the lips of your peers for that time. Next, I thought I'd have a look at the trends in cinema movies to get a better understanding on where we are positioned, because it's hard to see the forest through the trees. And picked up from IMDb's top 50 list for the years 1992 to 1995, that's the 4 years that gave us Pulp Fiction, Jurassic Park, Stargate, Aladdin, Lion King, Toy Story, Shawshank Redemption, Jumanji, Bad Boys, GoldenEye, Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, Apollo 13, just to name a few. And I used the data to compare with movies from 2016 to 2019. That's 11 MCU movies, 7 DC films, 5 X-Men movies, 4 Star Wars films, 2 John Wicks. There are a few honorable mentions, of course, but this could take a while, so let's just cut to the graph instead. This is the average of the 4-year blocks sorted by genre, the 90s in blue, the current in red. And comparing the 400 films from these 80 years shows up a very clear moving trend. Today we have a large increase of action, adventure, horror, sci-fi, and mystery. We have noticeable dips in crime, comedy, war, sports, westerns, and documentaries, with big dips in romance and family films. The purpose of looking at this changing trend is to see if anything big sticks out. And there is. So, aside from the swing away from reality and the closer to home stories, the biggest difference is that during the middle of the 90s there was on average 4 sequel franchise films per year. Now, we are on our 4th year of averaging 19 franchise sequels per cycle. And out of the 50 cinema favorites, nearly half are non-original works. Look, Endgame fits into this. Action, adventure, sci-fi, with elements of mystery and horror. It is the antithesis of franchise films. It has everything a modern audience is asking for. While it may go down easy, it doesn't mean that it's any good. Disney and the MCU know how to create the cinema experience and turn a profit, but it has come at a price.
You 3 faggots are going on stage, and you 3 faggots aren't going to stop me!
So, while it's easy to criticize these modern films for relying too heavily on politics, more on that on another video, and relying too heavily on formulaic plot structures, I thought I'd have a look at story archetypes to get a better sense of what is entailed in the structure of a narrative. These are the 7 story archetypes in use. You've got overcoming the monster, Jason, Freddy, Jurassic Park, Hannibal Lecter, Beowulf, Star Wars, every Avenger movie and most of the MCU. Rags to riches, Slumdog Millionaire, Rocky, Scarface, Cinderella, Aladdin, Harry Potter, The Quest, Lord of the Rings, Robin Hood, Tomb Raider, Star Trek, Indiana Jones, The Princess Bride, Willow, Voyage and Return, The Hobbit, Alice in Wonderland, Cars, Narnia, Finding Nemo, comedy, Blazing Saddles, Life of Brian, Bridesmaids, Spaceballs, Zoolander, tragedy, Romeo and Juliet, Titanic, Everest, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, and Rebirth, A Christmas Carol, The Grinch, most Christmas movies really. And I know that there are debates over the genres and archetypes in this list, the differing numbers or names of these types, and the fact that most films use a combination of these archetypes, but these 7 seem the most common. So I guess it's no surprise that we'll be repeating the same tales, but with franchises dominating the industry, it doesn't feel like that we're getting a variety of different stories with different creative directors and different managerial overseers, different investors with different inputs, different actors that tap into different emotional triggers, and coupled with the laziness of people writing these days, it's hard to be optimistic. Which brings me back to Endgame. Technically, the 20-minute CGI climax was well crafted, and during the final battle when the all-female Avengers band together to fight, there was a big cheer and the audience really seemed to love that scene. True, we really hadn't seen anything to that scale before, but I was forced to suspend my disbelief beyond its reaches to justify how all the women conveniently came together after being spread out over such a large area during such a high-maintenance battle. And as a result, the over-politicized statement detracted from my experience like some Brechtian play. There's this thing that somebody showed me years ago, and I stumbled over it again during the research of this episode. The Bechdel test for films. It asks 3 questions. Are there at least 2 women in the film who have names? Do these women talk to each other? And do they talk to each other about something other than a man? Simple enough, right? But the Incredible Hulk, Iron Man, Captain America, Ant-Man, the Avengers, Spider-Man Homecoming, Thor Ragnarok, Doctor Strange, Avengers Infinity War, they all fall short of passing this test. Right, nearly half of the MCU fail. So getting worked up about a couple of average scripts featuring wisps of feminist politics hardly weighs in comparison to the most basic of things like only 1/3 of movies passing the Bechdel test. At least Endgame scraped through on this one. So, In conclusion, if talking films and somebody asks me if Endgame is any good, there's obvious subjective and objective answers. Look, it did wrap up the story and allowed many of the original cast members to step out with a level of dignity. But things like Captain Marvel just magically finding Tony Stark stranded in space. Professor Hulk came out of nowhere and now we lost both characters. We watched Hulk movies to see him become the fucking Hulk. Now, who the fuck was that, right? Thor survived the vacuum of space but can't process the calories found in beer? Is Banner expecting to form a genuine romantic relationship with somebody that can overlook the fact that he's now a green monster? How does he ever expect to have sex again without killing the other person? They rested the entire third act on Thanos conveniently learning the details of the plan from some bullshit Nebula doppelganger Wi-Fi connection. And how the fuck did Valkyrie get a Pegasus? Did like Hulk snap one into existence for her? Why does the Hulk need glasses? So many questions. They used fucking time travel to solve their writing problems. That's inexcusable, right? It's almost the equivalent of ending a movie like, oh, it was all a dream. They made the time travel impossible to understand and justify and wrote the most complicated way to get the stones back, instead of just, now you know you done fucked up if audience members walk away from your movie asking that question. Why didn't they send Thor back 5 years to before when Thanos clicked his fingers and aim for his head this time? Or send Thor back to Titan when Mantis had Thanos immobilized and everyone was pulling the glove off, cut his head off, and there's 4 of the stones. Borrow Vision's once, and there you go. And in the timeline, that's the opening sequence of Guardians of the Galaxy. How the fuck is Star-Lord going to get his hands on the stone now that he's unconscious and Ronan's men are less than a minute behind him moving in to retrieve it? Fucking whatever. Look, there's no point in ignoring the impact that this film has had, which is probably why I spent all this time trying to find some context so I can make some sense of the billions of dollars it made. Anyway, so is the movie any good? Yes and no. Thank you, Quantum. I'm done. Let's just try and get on with the rest of our lives. My name's Caleb, this has been Door Number C, and join me next time for another episode on stuff. Okay? Bye-bye.